All right. Well, I think we have most everyone. We'll let folks kind of straggle in after they've had their coffee, and we'll go ahead and get started with our introduction. I want to welcome everybody to TAG's 5th Lege and Learn session. We really hope that you've enjoyed these sessions, and we've offered you an opportunity to learn more about our leaders as we march towards the 2021 session. We're delighted to share that we now have over 13 of these sessions booked from now until the end of November. Later this week, we're going to have Vice Chair of the House Transportation Committee, Brooks Landgraf. Next week, we're going to have Armando Martinez, member of the House Transportation Committee. That's next Tuesday at 9 a.m. And then next Thursday at 2 p.m. we have Celia Israel, who has been known as a huge transportation advocate in the House and has some great expertise. So you'll notice that we use the hashtag TXLEGE. I've mentioned that during all of these sessions. It's so critical that you use that when you're following conversations on Twitter and other social platforms. Sometimes it's more entertaining than anything, but you can kind of follow the current events and the policy and the discussions that are going on as we head towards session. And so we encourage you to use that for these conversations and others. I want to thank our sponsors for this series. We have Costello Engineering, Outreach Strategists, the Lentz Group, Half Associates, LAN, LJA Engineering, and our most recent one, who we don't have pictured, but I would like to give a shout out to, is Memorial Hermann. I know Freddie was on. I saw Freddie joined us, Freddie Warner with Memorial Hermann Hospital System. So thank you to our sponsors. We really appreciate your support. I do want to invite everyone to ask questions towards the after opening remarks. If you can use the chat box to message me directly with your full name, affiliation, and your question, and whether or not you want to ask your question or you want me to ask it. And you can send those questions throughout the program. So without further ado, we are honored to have Senator Kelly Hancock with us today. He is chair of the Business and Commerce Committee in the Senate. He serves on finance, and he is vice chair of transportation. So I feel like that's a good resume. You have to know about a lot of things. He served 6 years in the House and has served 7 years in the Senate. He represents portions of Tarrant and Dallas counties. And most importantly, he has taken time to be with us today amidst very busy schedules and commitments. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let him take over. Welcome, Senator.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So this is actually my second one this morning. I do on Tuesday mornings at 6:30 a virtual Bible study with guys from Australia, the Caymans, Jamaica, all over the world. So early in the morning. So I start the day early with my video conferences, but it's great to be with y'all today. And this is actually one of I'm the eternal optimist. So one of the benefits of COVID is we've had some really interesting opportunities on the business and commerce side, but it also allows us to talk with people from across the state without having to put in quite so many miles. And as an individual who still operates a business, operate a business in Dallas-Fort Worth area that services 6 different states, and so it's important that I'm around as much as possible before I leave in January and doing that. And so, in transportation, I guess this last session when Lieutenant Governor appointed me chair of Business and Commerce once again, and then he had vice chair of Senator Nichols. And then interesting thing there, and I don't know that this has ever happened before, but it is very unique for transportation. He's got Chairman Nichols as the chair of that committee, and then I'm Chairman Nichols' vice chair. Yeah. And so and he and I get along really well. Our personalities, we're both very business-minded and oriented. But he is, if you've ever talked to Chairman Nichols and he wants to make a point, you're going to get the history lesson. So he's going to take you back to when plastic was first invented before he tells you about his business. And I'm more of that dreamer. When it came to autonomous vehicles, my deal was, all right, we got to keep Texas on the forefront. We've got to make sure that not only are we and have we been in front for 14 years, we got to make sure we're doing what we got to do to make sure we stay in front. And I often go to Chairman Nichols because while I'm more that general macro thinker, he is the very detailed engineer, analytical guy, but our personalities mesh real well. And both in transportation and in business and commerce, that's just really worked real well for the two of us. And we get along. Very, very unique. I kind of call him the Dos Equis man because it doesn't matter what you bring up. He's got a story that he can tell you that he's personally experienced that relates to it, whether it's hunting with Russian guys in Argentina or whatever. You just never know. So it's been a lot of fun. And I've been on transportation literally since I got into the Senate, which I really enjoy. Was a big proponent on the propositions. I just, I'd spent 13 years on local school board before got into the House. And then when I got into the Senate, one of the things I always hated before the propositions, before we passed those constitutional changes to fund transportation, was the end of session where we always got into the political fight, and it was always transportation dollars versus education dollars. And it was a political battle, and it was clearly an attempt to get individuals voting against something that it was more about politics than it was policy, which drives me bonkers. I'm a business guy that I'm just more of a policy wonk than I am. I'm not that interested in the politics of things. I just want to do the right thing. And funding transportation to me was always a core function of government. We do a lot of other things in government, but the one thing we've got to do, especially from an economic standpoint, is we've got to make sure we take care of transportation. And, and that's what makes me excited to be dealing with Houston as someone who's in the chemical distribution business. Look, I bet you 75% of the goods that we move come through either the port or they're coming from the Houston ship channel. So we do a lot of importing. And so I understand in running trucks on the road every day, the importance of transportation to our economy. And that's why I've enjoyed being on there. I've asked to be on there and have glad to be a part of it. And frankly, glad. I know there's concern within the transportation community about funding and what's going on in the budget and that. Number one, the federal government's going to give us a lot of money for this session. So I'm not worried about this session. It's the session after that that concerns me a little bit. And so this session, not so much, but I haven't heard anybody that is talking about taking any funding away from transportation. Now, we're also not in May. We're in we're not even to session yet. So we'll see what happens in May. But the fact that it's there, the fact that 80% of the people voted for it, I'm one that feels pretty confident that those funds are it's going to be tough to mess with those funds to go pull them and go use them for other issues in other areas. So anyway, I think that's, and we've done some pretty unique things in transportation. I think transportation is going to continue to change. I remember, and we get a lot of promotion on the autonomous vehicle now. When I first filed that bill, nobody wanted it, frankly. And I mean, literally nobody wanted it. Governor didn't want it, the lieutenant governor, it wasn't like I was getting a low bill number for it. And we just kind of got everybody together and people began to see the vision and long-term capabilities of it. And lo and behold, here we are a few years later, and we've got, Tesla moving in and buying thousands of acres for development. And I think some of the things we've done in the state of Texas, looking out and looking beyond, specifically in the transportation arena with autonomous vehicles, I think was a big deal. We passed legislation for robot delivery services, which actually during the middle of COVID, we saw that pharmacies using that in the San Antonio market for delivering goods to limit interaction and contact with individuals. But I think it showed the nation and literally the world that Texas is ready to be on the forefront of technology and innovation. and that we're open to it, and we're going to provide a foundation and a framework that allows that to take place within the state of Texas. And I do think it is going to revolutionize transportation on how we deliver goods and services, specifically down in the Houston area, where you have very consistent routes going from the ship channel or from the ports into warehousing areas and locations. And so just those constant routes, I think we're not too far away from seeing an enormous amount of autonomous vehicle use, which will allow our infrastructure to be more efficiently used because of the ability to use that technology, that we're more efficient on our roads. And we're learning more and more on our roads how to protect them, how to use them properly, how to construct them based on the traffic patterns. And so that data is helpful on doing that. So it's just been a good pairing, Chairman Nichols and I, on doing that. On the COVID front, as a business owner, we were significantly impacted, and still are significantly impacted. Frankly, it's not fun. We're fine, and I tell my wife I feel guilty complaining sometimes, but you're used to operating business in a certain manner, and all of a sudden COVID hits, and it's miserable, but you're so much better than so many other people. But I have to adjust my attitude from time to time and realize, hey, life's not terrible. We'll get through this on doing it. But it immediately gave me the mindset of, all right, cash flow. What do we got to do about cash flow? And we began working early on with the governor's office on so many things, whether it be licensing, delaying the renewals on that, because my drivers were wanting to go to DMV and get their license renewed, and I'm like, heck no, that place is crowded. It's not where you need to be right now. To changing and tweaking some legislation to allow for restaurants to have more income. I got a pizza place that I like up here, and my wife won't send me by it anymore because they can sell wine now from their restaurant. It helped them generate cash, just a little tweak that we worked with the governor's office on. So I always come home with 6 bottles, and I don't know why. It's just, they have good price, they have good wine, they have good pizza. So she orders the pizza and she forgets to tell me to go buy, and I go buy. But we're trying to find ways to help businesses on that. And one of the things that's exciting as Chair of Business and Commerce is we threw a lot of concepts out there for businesses that did impact positively the economy in the midst of a pandemic. And so when we start session, we're excited, and we're already working on a lot of pieces of legislation. I'm on both the working group to start session, which is unique on how we're going to do that. And then on what impacts can we assimilate into legislation to spur the economy post-COVID. And so we're looking at a lot of things that the governor's done that have been initiated through rule changes or regulatory changes that have been economic stimulus in the midst of a pandemic on, okay, well, why don't we do these full time? Why don't we just put this in statute because it seems to be working? So COVID did allow for us to do a lot of trial balloons on everything from online notaries, which was already legislation, by the way. We just allowed it for wills, to, delivery, restaurants, enhancing them. All these little changes, we've been taking note of that, and you're going to see us roll out packages making many of these changes full-time changes. And so put them in statute so we can go, which should hopefully help spur the economy once we continue to move through this. I don't know that we ever get behind it, but as we move through it and grow accustomed to things and live life once again. So I'm a little excited about that. A lot of people talk about how, well, we're just not going to get much done this session. Well, in the business arena, I think there are a lot of opportunities for us to even make Texas a better place to do business. And we're going to move forward on doing that. So I'm going to open it up for questions rather than talk the whole time. So, I mean, and whatever you want to bring up. So as far as business and commerce goes, so y'all know, I mean, literally we deal with anything business related. Electricity is a huge for us. That's a big part of it. but licensing, TABC, alcohol issues, auto dealership issue. I mean, anything to do with the economy comes through our committee. And then I'm sitting on 11 other committees right now as well. So kind of the gamut. If you got questions, if I don't know the answer, I can make something up. I won't make it up. I'll just tell you I don't know.
Well, I did not list all of your committees.
Yeah, don't. It takes too long.
Because I was, yeah, it's
Yeah.
impressive. It's impressive though. And then and also the one about returning to session. So super critical. So now that we have you here, and we know all that, right? We're going to have you here for maybe 2 hours so we can get all the answers. Well, thank you so much for that great introduction, and just kind of a great overview of everything that you're kind of top of mind working on, and the highlights. So I want to go back to, you mentioned autonomous vehicles and your early support, and thank you for identifying that as something that you knew was up and coming, and that we needed to focus on that. And so I do feel like the Tesla is kind of it's a bit of a full circle,
Yep.
And lots of years in preparation and hard work. So thank you for that. In that conversation, as you know, there is the gas tax issue. So, right, these vehicles not paying into a gas tax, whether it's electric, autonomous, hybrid. And, Senator Nichols has talked about this. When we started talking about it, we TAG, it was at the beginning of last session, and we were asking, is anybody is anybody going to put this bill in? Well, there's not enough people driving around in these yet, and we kept pushing, and then some other bills trickled in, but last session wasn't the session, right? We needed to commission a study. And so can you share where you are with that and kind of what you think that's going to look like for session?
So I would equate this a little bit to where we are on broadband. There's a lot of people that want to focus on broadband with fiber, and they want to take a step instead of taking a leap and looking far out. So I think when we look at changing this, and it's going to have to change at some point, that we need to look far enough out that we recognize, because technology is changing so fast, that we think of it in really a different paradigm. And so, is it miles traveled and more of a user fee type situation, which is what, conservatives typically would support, is more of a user fee consumer tax, scenario and payment. So I think as we transit, I don't want to transition to it. I want to move to something totally different, because it just is different, and we're going to have to continue to fund our transportation and infrastructure on doing that. I just want to make sure that we're not just looking at taking the step, but we're looking far enough down the road that we don't have to take a step, then we got to take another step, and then we got to take another step. Let's go beyond and recognize that we really don't know what percentage or what type of technology will be on the road 20 years from now.
Right.
And so we're seeing that in telecommunications.
Right.
Is, the old TUSF was a subsidy to pay for landlines into homes. Well, people don't do landlines anymore, but that's the legislation we're still working off of today. So we got to kind of leapfrog into being more open-minded of what transportation may look like down the road.
So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm kind of understanding is, instead of saying we're just going to look at the fact that autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles are not currently paying into the gas tax, which is our traditional source of funding, we need to look at kind of the whole system of the gas tax itself, maybe. And is that kind of what you're thinking, that it just ties into a much larger conversation?
Yeah, just everything, and really get somebody that knows, and what do we conceptually think it's going to be 20 years from now? Because if you just try to pass legislation to address the next 5 years. We see how hard it is to make that adjustment. I mean, we've been talking about making the adjustment for, really
Long time.
12, 15 years. So you don't want to adjust how you pay for transportation and it only worked for 10 years. Cause then you're going to be stuck with it because it's going to take another 10 years to change it. It's hard to change. So when we make that move, we just need to make sure that we're open-minded enough about what it looks like and creative enough, which frankly is most of us elected officials, that's not our forte. Right. We're not the creative thinkers. We're not we're not thinking out there. We're not the Elon Musk of the world. Mm-hmm. So we need to bring some of that thought into the transportation arena, which frankly, it's kind of like the chemical distribution business. It's kind of old school and really get us thinking in a different pattern. And then we might back into something that'll work. But I just want to make sure that when we make that move, it's something that we don't have to fix again in another 10 years.
Right. No, I think that's a very refreshing approach to it. So I know our chairman, Mustafa Tamiz, has a kind of a follow-up question about the gas tax. Mustafa?
Senator, first, thank you so much for your leadership. Generally, when you have an elected official, you thank them for their leadership, and it's just a courtesy type of a thing. But I think that the way you have managed some of these important conversations really speaks to that. So I want to just kind of talk a little bit more about, often when people talk about a gas tax, they look at the number of revenue, they go, well, there's more revenue in registration fees, so maybe we should do registration, right? Or there is a little bit, if we did this, we might get more money. How do we help you, right, and others around the state in creating a more robust conversation that leads to legislation, right? Because in essence, I don't think it's a one-off thing, like we just do this one thing and we're done, right? It's an ongoing, the state population is growing, our infrastructure demands are growing. Part of that gas tax goes to education, which again has demands on revenue, right? So yep. These revenue conversations that we keep avoiding because they're politically uncomfortable, right? How do we have them in a way where we build public support so that when you do make the tough decisions, the public is with you?
Yeah, and let me preface it by saying, look, I was on school board for 13 years, president of the school board. We had highest teacher pay, starting teacher pay in the state 6 of my last 7 years. So I'm very pro-education, but to divert transportation dollars, we're diverting transportation dollars. I mean, just is what it is. And politically, I'm probably not supposed to say that, but we're diverting education. I mean, we're diverting transportation dollars. It goes back to my initial argument of why I wanted to see it, the propositions pass so much. I got tired of this political fight. Look, pay for education and pay for it, out of general revenue. But transportation dollars should be used for transportation. It is still a primary function of government. Now, it's not 40% of our budget like education is, but I mean, it's still an important role in government. And so I think adjusting those things, but I'm also, I'll go back in my hesitance historically to just increasing the gas tax is I'm typically thinking 20 years down the road. And then I try to back into the decision that I'm making. And when I look 20 years down the road, I'm going, okay, well, that's a short-term decision because I think 20 years down from road, I don't know that it's going to, the netting, you're not going to have, I'd rather see a steady increase in something that was going to be consistent rather than you increase a tax on something that is potentially going to see a depreciating revenue stream. I would rather think 20 years out, all right, what's going to work 20 years from now? Let's go to that type scenario. And so that's kind of what I was saying we need to look at. And I am a big fan of, and I think the technology is going to be there. It's a little creepy for some, but the miles you drive should determine what you contribute towards our infrastructure. And what that looks like, well, I don't know, but I know when I get in my car at the end of the day, it's going to tell me how to get to my house and how many miles I am from my house and how to get there. So, which is creepy, I get, but there's ways of tracking mileage without getting too personal on individuals, and looking at ways of funding transportation through a use and access of those through the infrastructure. Pay for what you're using, which what that does, especially to our seniors, it reduces the impact on them, and yet it's not unless we drive less and we have fewer people, it will be a consistent increase in revenue.
Thank you for that. I'm getting some messages in the chat box. It sounds like we're talking about vehicle miles traveled and some excitement, right? So I know that won't be the headline that we leave with, I promise. No, but I think you're absolutely right. It's an equity conversation, right? It's a revenue conversation. So, and thank you, Mustafa, for talking about it and framing it instead of kind of trying to stop these gaps and things like that. How do we have a much larger conversation? And I think that's exactly what you're saying. Looking 20 years down the road and then kind of backing up and saying, how do we get there?
And my staff probably wish I was more politically careful in what I said instead of just saying what I think.
Well, we appreciate that. So I'm going to switch to the topic of safety. I have a question from Jay Crosley with Farm City, who, let's see here. He mentioned that there was an interim charge to study transportation safety and proposed to end traffic deaths across the state. What are some of the bills or concepts that you, Senator, hope to lead on to help make Texas streets safer to walk, bike, and drive on?
We're just working with the agency on their recommendations. They have an enormous amount of data. And I think part of it is, I think the marketing campaign is actually a wise first step, make people mindful of it. I do think the other thing is newer vehicles on the road is going to be very helpful on doing that. And so primarily what we're doing is dependent a lot on the agency with their recommendations, because they do have an enormous amount of data, and seeing where we can do that. And, at the same time, it's got to be done cost effectively. You've got to get a return on that investment to make it work. And obviously the proper funding of our roads so that we have repair, that's where a lot of it takes place, is just not proper maintenance on the infrastructure itself. So that's one of and we've really done that we've looked at those corridors that are the worst. Unfortunately, the slowdown in the oil and gas sector will probably improve our safety a great deal, but at what, at a cost as well. So, but it's looking at those key corridors and making sure we're addressing the funding issues for those key corridors to make sure those routes are properly maintained and that we're ahead of the curve, which it's always hard to know where the next play is going to be, where the next boom is going to be. But again, and I think that's kind of the key. You can't have a boom and then the infrastructure follows 5 years later and the boom's gone and it's gone somewhere else. So we've really got to kind of work with our demographers to look ahead.
Right. So one of the other things with safety is that that TxDOT has the End the Street Texas campaign, right? We're about to hit that 20-year mark where we've not gone a day without a death on a Texas road. And one of the things that the data showed from COVID was there was an assumption that those numbers would go down and that we might even see the first day.
Yeah.
And we did not. And so what was revealed was that it was really related to speed. Now, speed on the major corridors.
Yep.
So with the conversation related to speed, we see also in residential and kind of more urban areas, there have been requests and there has been legislation in prior sessions to reduce those speed limits from, I think it's either 35 or 30 to 25, because the data has shown that just by reducing it, it's the difference between a fatality and an injury for a pedestrian, cyclist, whatever. So your thoughts on movement with those types of policies, looking at kind of the Vision Zero and the safety conversations?
Yeah, I think, especially in the environment we're in, that it's very important that we support our law enforcement and encourage them to enforce the laws that we have.
Mm-hmm.
I'm always a big fan of, because frankly, I can drive home today and people well, they won't be driving the speed limit because of traffic now, but pre-COVID, but in the midst of COVID, yeah, they were flying. I mean, because there was no traffic. I've worked every day because of the business that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it was definitely a speed issue. And so I think enforcing those laws is the first step that we got to do. And that can only be done when we properly fund law enforcement and support their efforts on doing that. And so a respect for authority, respect for law enforcement does equate to following the law. And so I would rather start there before we go look at, if people would just drive the speed limit, we probably would save some lives as well.
So do you think that there's any kind of appetite for a conversation about reduction of speed limits, even if the speed limit is there and it's 35, right? Sometimes people feel like that even in residential, right? That's too fast. So
yeah, and most of the residential that we see is 30. I don't see a lot of 35 residential, and a lot, and of course most of that, if not all of the 30 to 35, is all local issues and determining locally, which are probably the ones best suited to do that. At the same time, I think we need to have some consistency. I've gone through local areas that about a 20-yard stretch was a 10-mile difference just because it's a different city on a major thoroughfare, and we got to. Right. So it's kind of a balance on allowing that local control without local abuse. We had one that was a little speed trap that finally had to enter. I had enough constituents complain. I'm like, yeah, come on, city. You can't drop it for 20 yards and have a policeman sitting there 3 days a week.
Right. So you mentioned something about, you mentioned local control, right? It's always a hot issue. You're never going to come back and do these again, are you?
I don't care. No, I'm good. I mean, I do care. I'm sorry. That's not a good phrase. I definitely care, but I'm just going to say what I think.
No, that's what we need to hear. We need to hear what you think. So
my locals love me and they hate me. And it depends on the day.
Okay. Well, and speaking of local, we do have a few local officials on, so I do want to recognize them. We have Councilmember David Robinson. We have Mayor, Sugarland Mayor Joe Zimmerman, and I'm not sure if State Rep Ed Thompson is on, but I know.
Oh, no, sorry.
So if everybody else, just put it in the chat box if I've missed anybody. But we do have some local folks on. So the local control conversation, gosh, it touches so many different issues, right? So you can't, we could spend an hour just on that. But one of the things that's on our agenda is, again, having this conversation, even thinking about 20 years down the road, right, or future. We are, the sales tax is capped, right? We can't do anything. Even if we wanted to locally, we can't. There's a couple other things, and it's not a mandate from the state. It's just that enabling legislation. Can you kind of bundle that up in your best opinion about providing more options for localities to kind of be able to do their own, fund their own, and make those decisions as it relates to the local control conversation?
Yeah, and I think the main thing is we have to look at Texas as a whole. And so in our competitive situation, we've led, CEO Magazine has us, the prime spot to move a business over the last 14 years. And so it is a balance of that. when you talk sales tax specifically, one of the growing industries in the state of Texas is data storage. So whether it be Rack Station or whether it be Facebook that we have up here, the storage of data. Well, those computers, I know Facebook, they buy new computers every 3 years. Some of them buy them every 5 years. A huge sales tax expense. And so we have to look at maintaining a competitive structure, property taxes, obviously, which we major reform there, sales tax, so Texas, we have to look at what other states are doing, and we have to fall within some framework that continues to grow our economy, because whether you're a local elected official, a county elected official or a state elected official, economic growth is vital for our way of life. It's vital for our budget. A down economy is hard on everybody. A growing economy is good for everybody. So the key for us is making sure we're positioned and there are a lot of factors. Frankly, I think the work ethic, the people of Texas is the driver, because we kind of break it. We're kind of in a position we're better off on some areas and we're not as good off. And but it is the mindset of Texans more than anything that brings people here. We want to work. I mean, we want to get after it, and we don't care if it's, our summers are hot, our winters are cold, but our work ethic. But all these other things factor into it. I do think one of the things we could look at and probably should look is, I will say I've got cities in my district that, years ago they passed, they dedicated their parks tax, their sales tax to parks. Well, because they had big projects in mind and they were growing community, and frankly, they got to the point that they're like, okay, almost looking at how to spend money on that year, because it's dedicated, and allow them to adjust after a certain amount of time, when you go to the vote, and make that maybe a little bit easier. So if they want to transition from, we were funding this and now we want to move this over to transportation funding or other types of funding, it's possibly a way we can make that a little bit easier.
Thank you for that. I know Mustafa had another follow-up question, our chairman. Mustafa.
Just actually, I just wanted to spur this part of the conversation. As you were talking earlier in terms of the gas tax or other form of taxation, how education gets impacted versus transportation, keeping money in the same bucket. But a lot of also things are interconnected, right? So as you see our tag, we've got about 80 people on here now. You had David Robinson, who chairs the TTI committee of the city of Houston, to Darren, who leads a very big project for one of the largest engineering firm. But you also have like Freddie Warner there from Memorial Hermann, because the safety on the roads affects our trauma centers, which affects our overall healthcare costs for indigent care and things of that nature, right? So there's what you'll find amongst TAG members is that we're not just from the industry, we represent a broad, part of that larger community. And so we appreciate you being here and talking with us. One of the messages that we're trying to do as a community is that for every dollar that's spent, right, in transportation, you spur anywhere between $3 to $6 in economic activity. So, to your point earlier on, like, how do we get this thing back, right? One thing we need your leadership on is how do we get the different transportation groups with your leadership in talking from that same voice, right? Because in essence, otherwise, when there's just an engineering group, it looks like it's a self-serving group looking for money for themselves, right? What's unique about us is that we represent a much larger segment of the community. We're a fairly diverse group, and we talk about it, transportation, from a quality of life standpoint, right? We talk about it from an economic development standpoint. I guess what I'm looking for is kind of like your advice and your leadership in coalescing the different groups around the state, right, to come together and start to speak with one voice, because the pie is going to shrink, right? And we're going to have to find new revenue to grow the pie again. Any thoughts on like, how do we connect with around the state to do this?
Well, and as I mentioned, the key is economic growth. And so the pie doesn't shrink if our economy keeps growing. And so it's maintaining that balance, right? And making sure that we provide policies, tax structure, and a regulatory environment that does continue to grow, to encourage economic growth on doing that. But Mustafa, the way, and this is hard during COVID, and so the way I recognize, especially being on 12 different committees, I try to know enough of the subject matter that I can have a discussion, but I know that I'm not the expert. And so the only way to bring all those transportation groups together is to bring all those transportation groups together. And so when we build legislation, whether it be addressing balanced billing in healthcare, which, you know, we, after 10 years of working on that, I finally was able to get that done for the state of Texas, or autonomous vehicles, we've just kind of got everybody in the room. And the reason I like getting everybody in the room is, and shoot them straight, which makes people mad at me sometimes, and then also makes people respect what I have to say sometimes, because it may not be what you want to hear, but and so I think then what you do is once you get everybody in the room, you deal with, okay, what's reality and what's not. In other words, what can we accomplish, and what do we know is off the table? And if it's off the table, let's not waste a lot of people's time talking about it. Let's just take it off the table, and let's get that group together and go, okay, within the framework. I tell my kids all the time, if they're worried about stuff, and I'm still working on this, don't worry about what you can't change. And then focus on what you can impact. And so, you know, that's, hold on, I got an update all of a sudden. There we go. And so we've always gotten everybody in the room and just kind of literally walk through the process and took off. And as we walk through, we'd say, okay, well, that's not doable. Set it over here. Okay, let's stay here, and walking through it. And I think the transportation groups, and in COVID, I don't know how you do it, really get everybody together and just start having that frank discussion. Now, what I've found, again, in some of the groups is, which is personalities, is one of the keys to getting things done within the state is not making the governor mad. It's probably a good idea. You know, it's kind of like any of us. We tend to work with people we get along with, and people that attack us, we tend to not work with as well. And so find a good working relationship and an open, you know, in fact, my door stays open. I'm running a business, and it's the only way I get to go to Austin is in COVID, if we don't lose a lot of money. If we make a little money, I get to go to Austin. So the door stays open, but you have an open door policy. You bring everybody in, you get along, you know, you work through your differences, and you just walk through what you can accomplish and what you can't. And then you eventually get on the same page when you're honest with each other, when you're humble with each other, and when you talk through the subject matter and answer any questions. I just prefer to answer all those questions and deal with all that with everybody in the room. That way you don't have the hearsay. You're all here, and different groups think of different questions to ask that really everybody in the group needs to hear the answer to, rather than meeting with 5 different groups, 5 different occasions. Literally, autonomous vehicles, we had 75 people in the room, and we started from scratch. But everybody heard the same thing. We all shot them, we shot them straight, and we just walked through it. And the governor's office was in there, who didn't want it at the time. Nichols didn't want it at the time. He thought I was nuts, but it worked out. And so I think just getting everybody together, and humble attitude, straight talking, dealing with the realities, and see if you can get on the same page.
What I was going to ask was, can we lean on your leadership as we help build a statewide table?
Sure.
And as we help convene that with us so that we all can get on the same page before the legislative session. Because the upside on COVID is that it is easier to build a room, right, on Zoom. So people
Right.
from around the state can get on at
Yep.
the same time, and we can get on the same page without having to drive 850 miles from one side of the state to the other. Right?
Oh, exactly. And Mustafa, it's kind of what we do is we're just kind of, and it's even the group, that I lead in the mornings. I just kind of walk people through it. I'm not, the biblical theologian or teaching leader on this deal, but I just walk people through it, and we just kind of, I just kind of keep us moving. And so that's, as chair of business and commerce, that's kind of what I see my role at, is get the experts together and then facilitate the discussion and until we get to a point of coalescing. And I'm happy to help facilitate any of that work.
Yeah, so I'll hand this back to Andrea, but we would love to kind of lean and partner with you in building a statewide table, right?
Sure.
Around this kind of common conversation that everybody's having, but I think we're having it in our silos. So if we bring them together,
right,
it'll be valuable as you go to the legislative session next year.
Right. And you get my part in the silos is you're not all hearing the same thing. And that's why you got to get everybody together.
Agreed. Thank you.
I think too, as we look towards session, we typically have, or you often have, right, the advocacy days and that are centered around some of this kind of building of ideas and policy. And so as we march towards that and what that looks like, we've got some creative ideas of ways we can do that, but I'll definitely be reaching out to kind of see how we can plug you into that.
Sure.
And whatever that looks like, because that's unknown. So I'm going to do probably one or two more transportation, and then we do have some kind of general questions. So with regards to the port, Bruce Mann, who's on from the Port of Houston, says it's commonly recognized that the ports are the economic engine of the state. The legislature has done a great job finding port connectivity funding with a legislative rider program. Given the importance of freight and ports to our economy and future growth, do you anticipate the legislature funding another round of rider funding for the port connectivity in the upcoming session?
I don't know about the upcoming one, but anybody that doesn't understand the importance of the port and the growing importance of the port in the years to come needs to get educated very quickly. And so it's very difficult until we have all the pieces as far as the budget goes this time and knowing. But clearly, and I'm biased. I mean, again, I told you we import a lot of product, and it's, I just think it's crucial for the Texas economy that the people don't realize how important the ports are. So I don't. It's hard to talk specifically on the budget at this point on doing that, but I do understand. I think there are a lot of people that do understand the serious nature of making sure that we have the leading ports, not just in the nation, but in the world.
Right. And it comes back to that conversation, right? The investment in, and then the return, right. It's a huge, and we're really trying to kind of hammer that home with a lot of our, we're not asking for this, we're asking for this. Right. So,
well, and you can't fall behind on it. I mean, because, once people move, you just can't fall behind. We got to stay on top of that. Right.
So another question kind of goes back to, you mentioned federal money coming in. We know there's a pot, right? Kind of undecided.
There's a printing press too.
Yeah, that's fair.
We don't have that.
Just kind of, so it's two-pronged question, but kind of what your thoughts are on money that comes to the state, designated, undesignated, and how that gets divvied up from the federal government. And then Freddie Warner did have a question more specific to health issues. So they're making a number of COVID-related kind of waivers permanent. So, for example, telehealth, right? Do you expect that some of the state COVID-related provisions and waivers would also be made permanent? Or how do you see that?
Yeah, so I'm going to start there just because that's what we've been looking at. We've put together and rules and regulatory changes, everything from telehealth to, like I mentioned before, licensing, and we're going to be marching forward with a lot of that. You do have to get that in statute for it to be permanent. You know, a lot of those things, telehealth, for example, is the big one. You know, everybody loves it now, but trust me, there were people that fought it and tried to prevent us from being where we are. But COVID gave us kind of a test tube to try some things from a business standpoint and from a health care standpoint. And I would say, you know, the governor gets a lot of knocks, but he gets no credit or very little credit for the thorough research that was done on where he decided to reduce rules, reduce regulations, implement changes to statutes to improve our economy, to improve the healthcare across the state of Texas, and telehealth is one of those. And so I would tell you that there is buy-in across party lines for a vast majority of things that were done on the emergency order to address COVID. And I think you'll see those move forward legislatively in a bipartisan manner on doing that. Help me, Andrea. That was the first one.
Oh, it was
Go
just,
backwards.
no, just a small question. It was just asking you where you think the money that we get from the federal government
Yeah.
is going to go.
So one of the things that you see that we have a businessman as president as opposed to a politician is that when he sent dollars directly to cities and he didn't funnel them through the political channels, which as a business guy, I love the idea. He says, all right, big cities, we're just going to give you the money, go use it. You know, and you had to have a cutoff because frankly, you know, Houston knows how to fill out federal paperwork, and they've got the knowledge. They've done it before, especially with the issues they've had, natural disasters. You know, the accountability from the paperwork had to be done, so that's why you kind of limit it. But the money went directly to sources. It went directly to counties. It went directly, and then the state got some as well. And so, which allowed it to be implemented and put into process much faster. And so the speed of those funds actually funneling through and being effective within the pandemic was staggering. And it was really the mindset of, I don't care what's politically correct thing to do, because in the past, I guarantee you, every dollar would have flowed through the state and then to the counties, and instead of just going directly to where it was needed and divided up. And so we still got our pockets on doing that. And so I thought it was very well done and literally impacted the economy so quickly as we needed it to do. We have timelines on when we have to spend certain dollars, and it's very dedicated on how it has to be spent. I mean, we have had discussions on, all right, can we spend CARES Act money on this? You know, and so the rules take much longer than the tweet that we're doing it. And so,
right.
And you got to work with the agency to go, okay, well, and the agencies are the ones that are going to determine whether you can or can't. So we'll continue to look at that. I will say most of those monies will be in our supplemental. You got to remember our budget, our fiscal year, August. So
right.
It will go into our supplemental, but that will free up some capital to go into the next session as well. And there are timelines, I mean, that they'll say, all right, you got to use these monies before the end of the year, which we have millions that have to be used before the end of the year in specific usage. And then some of them is flexibility at the state level. For example, I was on with a co-op, Bandera Co-op, who took our legislation to allow telecommunications and expand broadband using their right-of-ways through their electrical co-op, and they're doing that. So now but they're not using CARES Act funding. And I asked them, I said, all right, so were you able to use CARES Act funding to expand broadband into rural areas so that kids could get, because they were working with the Bandera ISD, and they said no. And I'm like, okay, well.
Tried. Right. Have to try, have to ask.
Right.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, it is. It's a lot more complicated than just a simple yes or no often with all of these funding, and some people want more flexibility on the funds. Some people want less flexibility. So it's always a challenge.
Yeah. It's just not our money, and it's not the federal government's money. Right. And so you've got to have accountability, and you've got to have, knowing where those dollars are spent. And then as a state, we need to help the cities make sure that what you don't want is 5-7 years from now, federal government come back and go, so, oh, by the way, City of Houston, you've got to repay us $5 million of CARES Act money because you used it improperly. So that's the tricky part.
Right. I would imagine too that if the other side of that coin is getting funds and using it for something and then getting accustomed to having that funding and then it's not there, right, next time.
Or politically getting accused that you're cutting something when you were just using federal funds to supplement anyway.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. Been down that road.
Yes, I'm sure. A few times.
Yeah.
Mustafa's chuckling. Yes. So I know Jeff Collins with LJ Engineering has, he says it's a general business question. So I'm not sure what that means. Jeff?
Okay, Senator, again, thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I know it's going to be a tough session financially, looking for money, transportation. TxDOT's probably going to have $1 billion less based on the Prop 1 and 7 money, just with oil and gas prices and that type of thing. But on the business side, a lot of our member firms are of TAG or professional service firms. And I guess 4 sessions ago or so, there was a professional service license tax put on, and then 2 sessions ago, it was taken off. While I had you with your business hat on, I'd be remiss to not say, as you look for more money, I think one way to help all businesses is not put additional taxes on them. So I hope that's something that doesn't come up, or if it does, you can quickly quell it. But that does affect our firm's ability to conduct our business. So thank you.
And Jeff, I will, a little transparency here. So in April, we saw a 40% reduction in revenue in our business. And as I mentioned before, like I'm extremely grateful, and we're very blessed, but it ain't fun right now. And to put any more burden on any business in the state of Texas, that's someone who's there in the midst of it, trying to fight and survive, and not this guy. I can tell you, I personally know how difficult it is on business owners right now. It's, I love my business. If I had to give up one, I love what I'm doing for the state, but I love my business, and it's tough. I get you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. And I know we're a little past our time for today. I feel like we could sit with you for a lot longer and ask a lot more questions. So we might ask for another
do it again.
update.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Yes, as we get a little closer, and maybe as you have more information about what things are going to look like. I do want to close and just, if you can give a very kind of brief, as it stands now, your thoughts for, well, I think it was Mayor Joe Zimmerman that just was really frank about it and said, when are we getting back in the Capitol? So maybe that's the way I'm going to ask it. So if you can give just a quick crystal ball.
Yeah, so I am, and I'll say what I can, right?
Right.
So we were there last week, meeting. Things are changing rapidly with testing. I think the desire to maintain health, the Capitol's an incubator, especially during legislative session. I mean, literally, once someone starts getting the flu, I mean, this is non-pandemic, but just in a standard year, you just see it go. I mean, there's a reason we have that I've had hand sanitizer, because I'm in the chemical business primarily, in our office forever. But it's because, I mean, you just touch so many things, and you're trying to stay healthy through session, and it's very difficult when you're in that incubator and you're with people in that building. So, you know, we want to do it wisely. And one of the things I will tell you is we believe that the technology and the abilities, now I've been tested, I don't know how many times, but the last time self-tested, you know. All right. So yes, cotton swab up the nose, get enough to put it in an envelope and seal it, and just to be gruesome this early in the morning. And within 5 minutes, I knew whether I was positive or not. And so I think we're going to have the ability for people before entering the Capitol to know whether they're positive or negative in a very short time and access. I think the Constitution is very clear on the Capitol, and it's not our Capitol, and it's not, you know, I've always had the mindset, it's not my office, it's just the people that were there before me, and it's the people that are going to be there after me. And frankly, when I'm gone, I understand. I mean, other than my grandkids, nobody will know that I was even there. You know, there'll be a picture somewhere in the basement, maybe one day. And so this is the people's Capitol, and we've got to give them access, but we've got to do it in a safe way. And I think that through technology and based on the Constitution and our desire to be as open as possible, that you're going to see that and access to the Capitol. Now that's all up to the Preservation Board and not us. So, you know, we did have a hearing yesterday, higher education hearing. So we're starting to have some hearings, and those are kind of, again, test tubes of trying to figure out how this is going to work with session.
Well, thank you for that. I know there's a lot that you have to decide before you can publicly talk about it. So I appreciate you framing that. Delicate conversation.
I have to be careful.
Right, right. And bravery, self-testing. I mean, that's it's a new adventure, right? So,
Yeah.
but something that we might all have to be getting quite used to. So who knows?
The good news. In fact, I'll be with the governor Monday week again. So I do teletown halls with him from time to time. And you used to always like it when the governor would ask you to come be a part of UT's, you know, we had a roundtable discussion at UT Southwestern. Sorry about that, Memorial. But I have to be tested every time I'm around him. And I'm like, hey, I appreciate you asking me, but I'm kind of tired of the cotton swab up the nose. But yeah, so I'll.
Right. No offense, Governor, however.
Yeah, no offense at all.
Yes. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. I want to thank our chairman, Mustafa Tamiz, always adding great conversation and questions. I want to thank your staff for helping set this up. You have a great staff. They were wonderful. And then lastly but not least, we want to thank you. You were great. We appreciate your transparency, your candidacy, your, I mean, super, super helpful. That's what we want and we need.
Sure.
We can sit here and have a very light conversation, or we can actually get down to some of the real issues. So thank you so much. And we look forward to continued conversations. And we wish you, your family, your colleagues, and everybody on this call safety and health as we kind of walk forward and navigate all this together.
Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.